Hello, everyone, and welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. How are you all doing? This week, I'm recording this, obviously, as always, at about midnight, the night before this drops, so obviously, my wife is asleep. Obviously, the dog is asleep, so I'm going to try to be quiet. I'll try to keep this quick, because today's episode was incredible. Love today's guest. But just quickly, Tuesday was the day when the President of the United States threatened to end a civilization, and it's maybe the closest in my lifetime that I've thought that that was the end of it was going to be the end of everything. Obviously, some flicker in some decayed neuron in the M.C. Escher designed Overlook Hotel of his brain pulled him back from complete global annihilation. So yay for everyone. I guess it's a win for the human race. And if there's a silver lining to that, and I'm not saying there is at all, but if you want to find a facet that is possibly worth holding on to, it's that in the wake of that, nothing is as bothersome as it once was. Naomi and I went to a premiere party for the new season of a Friends TV show yesterday, and usually those kinds of things fill us with a lot of social anxiety and just feeling kind of like out of sorts. None of that. None of it. Not an ounce. Not a milliliter. So hey, if you have social anxiety and you're trying to do something about it, maybe it's not a pharmaceutical thing. Maybe you just have to walk to the brink of global nuclear annihilation and then take one step back. Maybe that's the secret of life. The other secret of life? Listening to today's episode, because like I said, this is fantastic. Today, I am talking to John Flansburgh of They Might Be Giants. I don't really think I need to read his bio, but I wrote it, so if perhaps you are unfamiliar with John, this should tell you all you need to know in preface of our talk. Originally from Lexington, Massachusetts, musician John Flansburgh met John Linnell in high school, and they formed They Might Be Giants years later in 1982 after both moving to New York. Trying to do justice to the breadth and depth of They Might Be Giants' CV in a short bio is unfeasible, but a few highlights of their 44-year career are their 24 albums, including 5 children's albums, their numerous Tony and Grammy nominations, and 2 Grammy wins, Dial a Song, and a million other things. On his own, John has released albums as Monopuff, directed music videos for bands like Frank Black and Ben Folds 5, and even appeared as a voice on Xavier Renegade Angel, one of my favorite Adult Swim shows. Of course, back in the early days of the show, we talked to John Lee, so if you're also a fan, check that out. Okay, back to the bio. They Might Be Giants' latest album, The World Is Too Dig, will be released next week on Idlewild Recordings, and folks, it is an absolute delight. This was very thrilling. I talked to John Linnell a few years ago, and I've always meant to talk to John Flansburgh, and with the new album coming in, I thought this was a great time. And folks, I love to report it. John Flansburgh, great person, really wonderful to talk to. I mentioned towards the end of the interview that I've been listening to They Might Be Giants since I was a kid. I was thinking about it, I was like, oh my god, I think Particle Man, and maybe I'm wrong, correct me if I am, but I think Particle Man was on Tiny Toons when I was a kid. Maybe that might be my first introduction to them as a band before I started buying their albums, but they're defining for me. They Might Be Giants. It will not surprise you to hear the next one, Weird Al, the Monkees, the Beatles specifically, the Yellow Submarine album, and DJ Jazzy Jeff, and the Fresh Prince. I think that rounds out the formative bands for me. So like I said, thrilling to talk to John, and even though he mentions in this, he's never done therapy, he was still very willing to go on the journey with me, and we get into some very interesting stuff about his childhood and what he was aiming to do, if anything, the early days of They Might Be Giants, and a ton of other stuff. I hope you really enjoy this. It was a joy to talk to John. But before we get there, I just want to very quickly let you know about some episodes that are coming up, I just talked to Josh Margolin, who was the writer and director of one of my favorite films of 2024, Thelma. That was awesome. Talked to Felicia Douglas from Dirty Projectors and a ton of other bands. Doug Gillard from Guided by Voices. That was great. So stay tuned for all of those. But for now, let's talk to John. Well, John, okay. This is interesting because something
and
that
I don't want to talk about the band now.
something I have been thinking about a lot for, I don't know, decades, and I talk about it sometimes on the show, is the idea of legacy. And maybe I need to start thinking about expanding the idea, not just about legacy, but legacy versus influence, or what does someone want? When I think about like what I want as a creative person, as a writer, what do I want to leave in the world, or as a podcaster, like listeners, like what do I want them to get? Like after, like, I'm older, and also since I was a child, I thought about death. So I was going to say, like, now that I'm getting older, but it's like, no, that was my entire life.
Well, I mean, you're not talking to the most goal-oriented person. I mean, it sounds to me like you have life. You think about your life goals, right?
Well, maybe. I mean, now, like, I have to be a little more proactive, in the way that the television industry is, and the way that, like, my wife and I guess I can say this much. My wife and I are trying to get the rights to a British show to do an American remake. And if I'm not on top of that stuff, no one, I have to kind of like send emails to my reps every once in a while and be like, hey, where is this thing? Or what's going on? Or, where are we? And if I don't do that, nothing ever happens. So I have to be a little more, but don't you have to think about that kind of stuff in terms of like,
but when you're talking about like legacy or like things like that, to me, that's like somebody who's thinking very big picture. Like, the first half of my life was such a calamity. Like, I just never, if anything good happened, it was always like a fantastic surprise. And then the second half of my life, I feel like, I kind of knew how it was supposed to work, and I kind of like clawed my way in that direction. But I don't feel like I had, when you hear people who are like really successful, they always have such like they seem almost like they're just going like, dear diary, someday my dream of writing, selling 1 million records will come true. Like I've never, I remember like one of the last times I played at CBGB, and we probably played there like 24 times or something, like 20 times, like a lot of times. We played there many, many times. In some years early on, we played there like probably like 4 times a year. As CB's was sort of coming to an end, I was like, the only thing more surprising to me that I played at CBGB was that I got sick of playing at CBGB. That to me seemed very unexpected.
Well, okay. See, there's so much here. I wrote down the word calamity. Also, I do think now that you are saying it, I think there's a difference between being goal-oriented, between wanting a legacy and thinking about how you influence people creatively or emotionally or however you think about that. Because, okay, here's the thing. I know so many people in entertainment who it was just a stroke of luck. Whatever they may be, whether they're good or not.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So like, to me, the idea of like being, and then that's ambition. So ambition even separated from goal-oriented kind of things where you're like, because the goal-oriented to me is more of like I have an idea for a TV show. I have an idea for an album. I have an idea and I want to, or even just a song, if we want to like condense it to a smaller unit or whatever like that. And I want to make this manifest in the world. Right. And there's that kind of like creative goal. And then there are like these larger kind of things where like you have no control over like how that does, what someone does with it, how they feel about it. So the idea of like legacy or like influence seems to me to be kind of nebulous things that no matter what you desire in your heart, you don't even have control over that stuff.
Yeah. I mean, not having control is seems like a pretty universal. I think, creative people, I think creative people in general want to have more control than they have. And creative people want to have a lot more control than they have. And, I think and people really, you can tell that, when you're listening to somebody, somebody being interviewed and like around the edges of it, you can tell that they're kind of like still sort of pissed off about something that happened like 25 years ago. That it's because they expected more control, and I'm not sure that was like, that's ever realistic. I think, I've got like a million like racing thoughts about these topics that we're talking about, because it really, John and I really, we didn't have like that much professional success compared to a lot of people. Like we didn't have that shot out of a cannon, like everybody knows who you are kind of success. And even when we had like modest international success, it was not. We were older. We were like 29 years old. Like we had really done a lot. We had been a local band for years. We had been in other bands. We had done lots of things. Lots of people we knew had like started and become very successful, or started and had some success and given up. Like we knew, like we'd already been kind of around the block a bit, so we were just kind of still doing it, but it wasn't like, oh, this is like, there was never a point, where my parents weren't like, you could always come do something else, like that. So it's always, they were always sort of hoping. I think it wasn't until like I actually got a Grammy that really changed.
Yeah. Okay. I want to go back to this, but first I do want to hit the word calamity is so strong. I'm curious, what did you mean by that when you said the first half of your life was a calamity?
Well, like when the office told me that I was, up for, on for doing this podcast, I was like, oh my God, like, as a kid, I was just a terrible student as a kid, and super manic, and really, I had very little focus. I had, very odd, like very personal obsessions that were not like universal, and it's like I felt like a weirdo. Like I felt like a really big weirdo.
Was that something that was like, was it justified by the other people? Did they look at you as a weirdo, or was it just something internal?
Oh, I think they all knew I was a weirdo.
What were the particular obsessions that set you apart? And why were you obsessed with them?
I'm really, I don't go to therapy, so it's like, I have not processed a lot of this. So, forgive me if I don't really have the words to describe it. Basically as a kid, and this is, I was the first part will come as no surprise. I was really obsessed with pop music. Like I listened to pop music all the time, like way more than most people listen to pop music. I just found it absolutely hypnotizing. And I was also very preoccupied with, recording, like how the recording process worked. That to me, that was extremely magical. I was also really interested in photography. I was really interested in, sort of the mechanical processes that capture things. I was really obsessed with printmaking, and I was really obsessed with typography. And really obsessed with typography. Like I knew a lot about printing and typography as like a child. I knew, when most people are like figuring out words and reading stories and getting swept away by like how interesting a story would be, I'd be like looking at the words on the printed page and realizing, oh, this is like a patch where they had to reprint the output to make some correction in the manuscript. I could see where like the cut marks were, and like where the weight of the type changed. I was just very tuned into that. And I don't know. I mean, I have no explanation for what. I mean, the fact that I later in life I became a professional graphic designer was not a surprise to anyone. I mean, when I was in my 20s, I worked with other graphic designers, obviously, and back then they would say like, if you just wanted to sort of stop a conversation and just start try to explain what a font was to somebody, because that was the word that was not in, before the personal computer. That was a very specialized domain. Like it was very, I think somebody was saying something effective that like they would often tell people in the CIA that saying that if you tell people you're a graphic designer, it'd be a good cover, because no one knows what to say to a graphic designer. No, like no one's going to casually slip into shop talk with a graphic designer, at least in the 20th century. Now everybody knows what graphic design is, which is interesting. But back then it was like a very narrow thing. But my dad was an architect, so he knew what graphic design was, and he was actually there. He was quite encouraging of my interest in that, because he knew it was like part of design, like it was part of like industrial design or anything like that. So it wasn't like that was kind of more practical.
I get what you're saying, and I can't explain it to myself either. There's something pleasing about looking at different kinds of fonts. I know that when I'm doing some comedy video or just whatever I have to do, and I have to go through like 500 fonts to try to find the exact specific, I'm like trying to do a parody of like, say, a snake oil salesman kind of thing. And I'm like, okay, so I have to look for like a 1907 type font that will look correct in this so that I can make my stupid idiotic joke. Why am I wasting an hour doing this? But I'm sitting there going font by font and being like, no, not exactly it. That looks more like it's 1920s. Like a flapper would use that or something. Like, I know what you're talking about, because it is obsessive. There's an obsessiveness, and it's also the other, I was going to say side of it. I don't know about side of it, but another dimension, another facet of it is there's a pleasure in finding the exact right thing, and you don't know what it is. You just have to kind of like cycle through. I mean, maybe you as someone who's a professional, like, does know, like, no, I know this has to have a serif or whatever. Like, maybe there's a little more intentionality in your brain, whereas I'm just kind of like fumbling. But
yeah, well, I mean, it's not necessarily a mad search, but it is one of those things where there's meaning in every part of it, which even if it seems like a very normcore choice, there's still all sorts of like there are all sorts of strategies within it. It's it's just like, yeah, it's design. There's a lot of options in design, but it sounds like you have Hollywood connections. I just, as a lay person, I want to send out a strong message to all the people in the creative community in Hollywood and beyond, especially the people in the art departments there. If you're doing a historic, like a costume drama, historic film, and there's a hand-painted sign in the scene, have someone paint it by hand. Don't try to find the computer font that looks like. I was just watching a rerun of Downton Abbey the other day, just passing through the that world, and they're like having their garden party, and it's like 1905, and I'm staring at what is clearly computer output, onto some weird Kinko's plastic 3M product that has been transferred onto a piece of particle board. And I'm like, this is not what a sign looks like. This sign would have been painted by hand. So I'm pleading with the creative visual artists who love listening to podcasts. Hand paint your signs. How bad could it be?
I feel like if this was the 1980s, that should have been followed by a shooting star, and The More You Know should have played after that.
Yes, John Linnell said that if next time we've won a couple of Grammys, but the next time if we ever get to do the Grammy again, he as his thank you speech, he wants to say, when you're getting up from your seat in the airplane, do not pull down the seat in front of you. There's somebody sitting in it.
I would love to see an award speech that was just someone's like kind of personal gripe / a kind of PSA type thing.
Well, it is like a PSA though. It is. We're all trying to make the world a slightly better place.
Many of us, you and I, are trying to make the world a slightly better place. Many of us. I don't want to make a blanket statement.
Right. Okay. Yes. No, that's true.
But like when you say calamity, like, was it really like, were you ostracized? Did you have friends? Was no one? I mean, obviously I know you met John in high school, but like,
no, I had friends. I had a couple of really close friends. And in fact, John and I became friends in a larger group of kind of, like we were in the newspaper clique in high school, and we all worked on the paper, and I think it was like a gang of pretty outside people. There were definitely a lot of individuals banded together.
Seems like a polite way of putting it.
Well, I mean, it was like, yeah, there was a lot of different kinds of people, and some of them were, pretty extreme, and it was just a bunch of goofballs.
Wait, what was the newspaper like for you guys? Because I was in the newspaper. I was the editor of the 9th grade of the junior high newspaper, and then I just became kind of like a reporter, I guess, in senior high because I didn't feel like doing whatever I was supposed to do to work my way up in the hierarchy of the masthead. But like, what was it like for you guys?
It was like the only high school newspaper that did not have a real sports section, because nobody who worked on the paper really knew anything about sports. I actually did ghostwrite a bunch of sports articles. I would get like very cursory descriptions of what was how the game had gone down, and I would just like sort of puff it up into something that seemed like a description. It was some pretty ripe baloney.
I was gonna say, were you interested at all, or was it just more like, well, we need this article on the football game?
we needed the article, and I mean, I knew what the tone was supposed to be, so I just kind of faked it. I did not put my name to it. I put a fake name to it.
So you had an alias for the sports writing for the high school newspaper.
Yeah, it was our paper. But our friend John and I had a very good friend who also worked for the paper, who wrote tons of music reviews. His name was James McIntyre. His nickname was Jimmy Mac, and he was a big part of our social group, and he was kind of, he always knew about everything in advance. Like he knew everything about it. He was an incredible culture vulture. And I realize now when he wrote music reviews for the paper, he was really emulating like Lester Bangs. Like he was kind of had that Gonzo-ish Cream magazine journalistic style, kind of like anti Rolling Stone in a way. Like it was all very, very celebratory and frothy. And but he introduced me and John to the Ramones. And I actually when well, I guess when Tommy Ramone died, or who I forget who the final Ramone to die was. Um, but when the final Ramone died, I actually was I wrote a piece for Slate magazine about it, and I think like one of the things that was so amazing about a group like the Ramones is that like the first time we heard them, it was like the first thing you thought about was like, is this even for real? Is this a joke? Is this for real? Like, how much of this is real? Like, it was so different.
Wait, can I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah.
Like when you first, like, what was it about it? Because it's not like it was that, I mean, there was plenty of rock music like that preceded
this circles back straight to the very beginning of our conversation when we were talking about influence. And I think the thing about a band like the Ramones is they change. If you were there, you would be very aware of that. They really changed the pH balance of the pond water that everybody was swimming in. There's a great audio tape of Lou Reed at like whatever A&M Studios or whatever studio he worked at in New York, being played a cassette of the Ramones, and then somebody recorded his immediate response after hearing them, and he was like, "That's it. They've done it. They broke the code. They've broken through. They're doing it. They're doing what everybody wishes they could do." And it's like, I think part of it is like just the drive of the guitars and the drums, like just the drive of the music was so relentless, so it was just such a like those things they break up the streets with, like not a sledgehammer, but like the
jackhammer thing.
It was like a jackhammer. It was like everybody else had sledgehammers. They had a jackhammer. Like it was like it was rocking out at a velocity that no one had ever heard. And then like the nutso lyrics of just like, Blitzkrieg Bop or Beat on the Rat. Those are like these pure 12-year-old boy, like id ideas, like, just weird, violent, but then presented super violent, but then presented in this super cartoony way where it seemed very harmless. Like these are not scary people, but what they're saying is like sociopathic, so that combination, that little cocktail of things. And, once they're in the world, everybody's kind of changed a little. Like that's the amazing thing about a band like the Ramones is that we're all kind of different afterwards. And if you weren't around before, you don't realize that you live in a world that's like post Ramones, but they really were. The Ramones didn't sell a ton of records. They didn't have a ton of hit records, but like I don't think there's a musician working that doesn't somehow like take something out of that's very different than most. It's just very different. It was extremely new. I mean, but anyway, but how did we get on this topic? Oh, well, my friend Jimmy Mack, he was, he had this crazy record collection. He always was like, I saw the Cars' second show, right?
The Cars.
At the Rat. The band The Cars. I saw them at the Rat in Boston, the Rathskeller. There were dozens of people in the audience. There were not hundreds of people. There was not 100 people in the audience. And I know because I would get there first. I had a fake ID. I counted how many people were in the room. I recorded things on my cassette recorder, which I hid surreptitiously. I have many, many recordings of things that happened at the Rathskeller and at the Paradise in Boston in the mid 70s.
Like What's Happening? Did you ever watch that show? There was
What's
Happening? There was an episode where Rerun taped the Doobie Brothers, and it was and he got caught, and it was this whole episode about how you shouldn't bootleg concerts. That was the goal of the episode.
Wow. Nobody ever told me that. But no, I was very, very into as I said, like I was very into recording and like that kind of thing. And so I had like I had like a 3-inch reel-to-reel tape recorder when I was like 10 years old. I was really I was really monomaniacally into this stuff. So yeah, but my friend Jimmy, I only knew to go to the Cars show because a week earlier he had seen them play at a high school in like some western suburb of Boston. Like they were playing in like, Framingham High School. Like their first gig was basically a warm-up gig for the real show at the Rat. So they were just, who knows what that was like. But Jimmy saw them there and was like, you got to see this band. They're incredible. It's insane. Like they're like fully formed. They're like ready to go. And they were a very impressive band. And I have to say, when you couldn't understand the words, the mystery of the Cars was quite intoxicating.
Do you think I don't know how you answer this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. If Jimmy Mack hadn't been in your life, do you think you would have gone on the path you did if he hadn't introduced you to the bands that he introduced you to?
Oh, he was incredibly inspirational to me. I mean, I remember having a conversation with him when I was like 18 years old. I didn't start playing the guitar till I was 18. And I remember having a conversation with him, and he was like a DJ. He was like a promo. He moved out when he was 17. He moved to New York and, had a job as a promo guy at Polygram Records. He was like sort of, he was the first person anybody knew who was like it was like he was functioning like an adult as a teenager, which was, something that I guess in the film Almost Famous, you kind of get a glimpse of how that idea was sort of acceptable, but it was also insane. It didn't make any sense that a kid we went to high school with was working at a record company in New York City. It's just like, that seemed wild to me. But what was I going to say? Oh, I had this real heart-to-heart conversation with him where I just said, like, I feel like I can barely play the guitar. Like I can, but like I'm writing these songs, and I basically was just saying, like, I felt like a total imposter at, just trying to, think that I could, like, it was the punk rock moment. It was 1977, 78, and it was sort of this amnesty day for wannabe musicians. And I think in a weird way, I really rode in on that. Like, it's like, I've got my special amnesty card here that says, like, it's okay to be terrible at playing the guitar, and yet, like, you should listen to what I'm doing. And he was just like, don't ever think about, being an imposter. Like, there's no such thing as an imposter in what you're doing. Like, everyone's an imposter, and no one's an imposter. Just if you're doing it, you're doing it. And that means it's real. If it's happening, it's real. And just play what you want to play and say what you want to say. And it was an incredibly, it was a great boost to my confidence at the time.
That's amazing. Something I've been thinking about as you've been talking to I've been trying to think in my head about how to reconcile a lot of your early obsessions, right? Pop music, recording, fonts, graphic design, all of the stuff to me in my brain, form and process. I think it kind of revolves around form and process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What do you think what it is about that excites your brain?
I mean, this sounds very like postgraduate work kind of stuff. And not to sort of, climb into my own head too much, but I think it's about understanding idiom. All these things have every ultimately, I guess, music, every song is like its own variant of a set of musical ideas. Like you can point at any part of a song and say, this is clearly from this thread of musicality, but then they added this little spice of this kind of musicality. And some of those things are ethnic, and some of those things, have like long ethnic traditions. Some of them are, some of those things are, electronically induced, like that, or like the effect is, just something that somebody thought of in, Les Paul thought of in 1951, or Jeff Emmerich thought of in 1965. There are people who change things in meaningful ways that you can figure out where it started. And I think, knowing those things, like there's no limit to how much you can know about, you can dig in. The thing about music and graphic design and, and art, visual art in general is, and this is true of photography, this is true of filmmaking or cinema or anything, like there's no end to it. Like you can dig in as far as you want, and there's still more to understand. Like, I think if you were a cinematographer, you would be in heated agreement. Like, you don't have to be the movie director or the screenwriter. You can just be the cinematographer, and you're still in a world where there's no limit to how much you can know and how much you can dig into it. It's just like, that's a world, just think like it, it took me forever to figure out, like, I remember when I first started working with lenses and doing photography and doing like a little bit of filmmaking and doing rock videos. And I was like, why would you ever not use a wide angle lens? Everything about it seems cooler. And it really took me like quite a bit of time to figure out, like, oh, there are so many reasons why it's great to use a long lens. At this point, I feel this way. I feel this way about Steely Dan. When I was a teenager, I could barely understand how people could tolerate Steely Dan, and now I kind of love Steely Dan. So people change.
Yeah, no, I totally get this. When I used to be a philosophy professor, and I taught a philosophy of art class a couple times, and
you should be telling me.
No. Well, I'm curious what it does in your brain, but I can tell you that what excited me about this one class was I forget the title and I forget the author, but it was basically like a dialectic of forms. So it went through just like shapes, like aesthetic shapes, like, I don't know, like a headboard in 1850, what they might have carved on it, and then what it might be carved on it, 20 years later, and how that was a response. Just the shape of it was a response. It wasn't about like the meaning or anything else. It was like, hey, there's a dialogue going on throughout history of the kind of just like shapes and forms of art. And that's fascinating. And it goes, like any other thing that you can be interested in, it goes back so long, and there's so much, and it's not just like, it's not just temporal, it spreads out geographically throughout an era, so that you have this whole, the length and breadth of history is full of these kind of formic conversations.
Right. Well, I mean, art history is, it's no surprise that art history as a pursuit is so politicized, because culturally what you're talking about is all these things. You're basically trying to figure out what the culture really adds up to. And those are really big, those are really big questions. And it doesn't surprise me that, like, that people who are coming in with like, ideas of like feminist ideas, or, ideas of like racial history or things like that. I mean, ultimately there's a lot of economic expression, or you think about like, Protestantism and like what that does. You introduce that to a culture that was previously Catholic, like that's going to change the size of the building, and it's going to change the pitch of the ceiling. It's like, it's going to affect the way people will have a different idea of grandeur and a different idea of modesty, and it's just all these things. As culture moves around, people want things to complement their experience. And that's what changes style.
Yeah. I don't know if this is answerable, but I'm going to ask it anyway, and we'll see where it leads.
Oh, I think we're answering all the questions now.
Just because you were raised, I'm thinking about this. You're raised in the tumult of the 60s into the 70s.
Let's move on to Israel and Palestine after this. I think we're on to something.
Here's the thing that I'm thinking of. You're raised in this kind of tumultuous era, like I was born in the 80s, in 79. I was raised in the 80s.
Uh-huh.
As tumultuous as the world was, America felt pretty kind of like calm for most of my life, right?
Mm.
I'm wondering, is this just the way your brain is kind of set up, where this is what's of interest to you? Or, and this is why I say I don't know if this is answerable or not, but like, I was thinking of like, I wonder if there's something in this of like the kind of chaos of the world you were raised in, a little bit of the America you were raised in. If there was something satisfying or about, hey, this is like, there's so much here that I can dig into, and there's some kind of definitiveness to it where I can like look at a font and there's something solid about that.
Right. I mean, that's an interesting, I mean, I think, listen, I mean, these are to me, whether it was like design or art or, visual stuff, cultural stuff, or fashion, or even just like watching a TV commercial that was really zippy zappy, or listening to, the Beatles or James Brown or whatever, which were like totally like the radio of my childhood. All those things were, they were fun. I mean, it was in the background there, it was in the back. I mean, I think this is why, I was born in 1960, and I think there is this tendency of boomers to be extremely tedious about, how chaotic, the time that they came up in was. But, I mean, you could make a pretty good argument that it was actually pretty chaotic. I think the transition from the Eisenhower-ish time to the Nixon-y time was, a lot of stuff. There was a lot of stuff happening. And I was a child. And, my dad was an architect. His firm was in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And, right in sort of in the shadow of Harvard University. And they were really in the barrel. Like there were student protests on the Harvard campus that bled out into Harvard Square. It was like long hair and, the sexual revolution and, all that stuff was brand new and super freaky. And I think my parents were young people, but they were like more in the sort of, groovy in the way that like people who worked for the Rand Corporation were. It was like, they were like groovy in the way that somebody would be groovy in the office of Mad Men. And actually, I mean, I have to say, watching Mad Men, was amazing. It got so many things right. I was actually kind of shocked at how smart a show it was. I was actually in my father's office when the IBM Selectric typewriter arrived, and there's a parallel scene in Mad Men where they're so. I'm sure there's a German word for this. The similarities between real life, my memory, and what is in the show, it just runs absolutely parallel. It's like shocking.
Unheimlich, I think. I think there's a Freudian term.
Yeah, well, you've got the philosophy background.
Do you think, were you trapped in between these two things, like your parents, kind of the older mentality and the new 60s-ish world that was coming up, or did you gravitate towards one?
I think I was too young to really understand what was happening around me. It was like, because so much of it was it was the concern of grown-ups, the Vietnam War, all the stuff of the 60s were mostly like adult, very much adult issues. So I just a lot of it, probably made me just a little bit scared. I didn't relate to my parents in certain ways. Like I wanted to have long hair. Like I had a crew cut. My grandfather was like a career army guy. So it's like that was sort of in the background as well. It's like, you're gonna go visit your grandfather with your crazy long hair. Like that's not gonna go over.
Well, I mean, your brother is an activist. So like,
Yes.
was he that like, he's only a little older than you, but like, was he then like, what was, was he rebelling?
Yeah, he was probably more of a rebel than me. I mean, yeah. I mean, I was just a little brother, like, um, and he definitely was into growing his hair out and doing all the hippie stuff. Um, and we'd listen to like Firesign Theater records. Have you ever heard the Firesign
Oh yeah.
Theater? Again, those are like records those are things that are really hard to explain, like how, I don't even know what kind of entertainment that is. I mean, you could sort of say like, oh, it's sort of like Cheech and Chong, but it was not broad or accessible. It was actually very much, it was almost like teaching you how to appreciate like like post comedy. I mean, I think, or what is the term? When you think of like modern comedy that is very absurdist, it really along those lines.
Yeah. 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 I think a lot of I think there is a segment of Americans who, if you listen to or watched if you listen to British radio, like comedy stuff, or watched British shows when you were younger, you got split off from people and from obviously I can watch a Statham film and talk about, whatever the latest action film is that I've seen, because there's some pleasure in just being able to talk to someone at a party. But really, in my heart, I'm thinking about Taskmaster or some other, British thing that is in my head that is like really exciting me.
Right, right. Well, I mean, I guess it all comes down to, I think in my childhood, in my teen years, there was a very strong sense of what the mainstream culture was, and then there was also a very strong thread of what was really just only a counterculture. And like when we live in a time now where there is really no monoculture, even when something is as successful as like somebody like, like the Bad Bunny thing is the really interesting example to me, because Bad Bunny is about as successful a recording act as you're going to get in 2026. So it's like, and yet the president of the United States and his allies are so culturally deaf that they don't know that they have to roll with it. Like anybody, if in the era of a monoculture, you would have some guy like Bob Hope, and he, who's like 30 years, down the toilet, not understanding what kids are doing. He stopped understanding what kids are doing when they were still doing the Lindy Hop, probably. And so it's like, so how in the world is he going to keep up? Well, he's not going to keep up. He's just going to smile and say, that thing you're doing is wild. And just like nod his head and wear the Beatle wig when the Beatle wig arrives from the prop department. And, just be an affable older person and acknowledge that you don't really know what's going on in the world. What's weird about now is that like, there are tons of number one records that nobody even knows. Most people don't know. Like I track the charts, I listen to what's happening, and I still know. I'm very aware that most people do not know those songs, and it's just a weird idea to me to have a number one song in the country, and people don't know it. How odd is that? Especially when there's so many slamming great songs like APT.
Okay, well, that's what I was about to ask. Do you keep track of these things because you want to just know what's going on, or do you keep track of them because you actually like the songs and you're like, oh, I can find, yeah, this is a number one hit, but there's something interesting about it that I can find in it.
Well, I listen, like, if I'm driving in the car by myself, I will listen to Hot 97, which is like the big hip hop radio station in New York City. And I think half the time, I might get caught up in like a catchy song that's got some really hooky thing about it. But a lot of the time I'm just really like checking out the production techniques, because like those production techniques are like, that is culturally like that's about as far left as you can get in the world of production. I mean, this is ancient history now, but like, when Missy Elliott and Timbaland were coming up, like that stuff was like blowing my mind, because they're working with a lot of the same tools that I work with when I'm putting tracks together, but they're so free with it. And then like later on, like, I have to admit, like when like Trap House came along, I really thought like there's got to be something in here that I can glean that like could be a really interesting point of departure for us production wise. But it was really hard to. It's hard to pull apart productions like that. They're so. Part of it is like. They're just really stoned. First of all, like they're like, entirely created by people who are entirely stoned. So it's just hard to get to that, without being stoned. But I don't know. It just sort of unravels when you examine it too much.
Okay. We're almost towards the end, and there's a couple things I'm still curious about.
I don't want this to end.
We go as long as you have time for.
I have this tumbler of coffee in front of me.
I am curious, when you were growing up, was it a kind of 1950s parenting where the parents and the kids are very separate and their parents are just authority figures? Or was it a more, as it got into the 60s and into the 70s, was it a more kind of like, I don't want to say collegial environment, but like, you know what I mean? Like, we're like, I was raised, I'll tell you this. My parents, even though I was born in 79, it was still a very like, they're authority figures. Like they're loving.
My mom and dad were moms and dads. They were not, there was no call me by my first name kind of thing. And you're perfectly honest, I can never believe that actually happens, even though I know it does. I know parents have very different relationships with their kids now, and I'm sure it's infinitely healthier, but it all seems very unbelievable to me.
Yeah. No, I can't. I remember in Temple once, one of my friends was like, yeah, my parents let us like drink in the basement. And I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
That they would allow that at all. Like, any of that. I was just like, it was so foreign to me.
But I don't have kids, so I actually feel like I don't have a right to speak on the topic, because I haven't had to actually face the real. You hear a lot of parents. I've heard this from multiple people I know say, I'd rather that they experience it like around me than somewhere else. And of course I nod my head and I agree. And then I think, really? Does the kid want to get slightly drunk in front of their parents? But maybe you can get front. Maybe just wait till you're 18. Go do it somewhere else.
Yeah, or the ones that could confide in their parents, like could tell them their problems. I was like, I can't. I hid my high school girlfriend from my parents until it was obvious that we were dating, because I was just like, I don't want to let them know anything about my private life.
Well, lucky for you. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I got a job. I kind of left high school in my senior year. I left because I had enough credits to graduate, and that was the way the school was structured. So I was absent for 153 days, evidently. But I got a job in a record store in Harvard Square, and then I got a job I got an apartment there, and so I moved out early, and that allowed me to kind of. I didn't have to ask my parents if it was okay to drink a beer. I just got an apartment and drank beer by myself.
Did you leave early just because like, hey, I don't want to do this anymore, and there's other things I want to do? Were you like trying to be like create an identity for yourself apart from your family? Like, what was going on?
It's sort of hard to say. It's sort of hard to sum up. Like it was complicated. It was a lot of things. I wasn't. I can't really talk about it in a public forum, but it was the right thing to do. I'm not even sure that it was like a natural that I would have ended up going to college at that point. I happened to go to college, but that I really, in a weird way, it was the beginning of a much longer interval of floundering around. But I got my scene together ultimately. I ended up, art school really was the thing that I went to two different schools before I went to the Pratt Institute, and Pratt Institute was really like my sort of creative savior. And that was like, I'm very grateful that I kind of found a soft landing in the world of fine arts. And a lot of what I learned in getting a BFA at Pratt ended up being immediately transferable to being in a rock band, which sounds completely unlikely, but I could talk about it forever.
Did you have a desire for yourself? Because I know you said earlier that you weren't like goal oriented, but was there something you wanted, even if you maybe didn't have the mechanism to go after it?
I just like making stuff. I like making stuff, and I like the act of making stuff. I like thinking about making new stuff, and all that seemed very positive, just in an immediate. It's like one of the only things that was satisfying to me was like just doing things. And, but I was also like, I was like very easily distracted. I was very easily frustrated. To be perfectly honest, I started drinking coffee the day I got to Pratt, and I don't think a day has gone by since, and that this is probably 45 years. I don't think a day has gone by that I haven't had coffee. So, that was a real life changer for me. I drink a lot of coffee, and I love drinking coffee, and it sort of changes. Speaking of, changing your pH balance, like it changes who I am. In for the better. I would recommend it to anybody.
John, I think we're on the same wavelength. Let me just tell you what my afternoon was like yesterday, where I bounced around from editing a podcast, working on, I was just proofing a script that I was writing, doing the laundry, doing the dishes, prepping dinner. And I was just jumping around from, I would do a little bit of one thing, and then I would be like, oh, I forgot to do this other thing, and then run to my computer to do that for a little bit, and then run, oh, the laundry's done, and run over there. And it was the happiest I've been in a week, where I'm just like, oh, I really need like a bunch of different things to just kind of like flit around to.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know if that's exactly what your brain is like, but I feel like we're at least orbiting the same planet.
Absolutely. It's good good to have that to-do list. It's great to check off all the boxes.
But I have to but my brain, I couldn't just like do one thing and then finish that and go to the next thing. It was this constant like rotation through all these different things that was enjoyable, if that makes any sense.
Right. Well, I mean, that is the fun of mania, I mean, it's fun until it all comes crashing down.
Was there a point though where you made an actual choice for yourself, like this is what I want to do? Or was it just once you found Pratt and you're like, oh, I like doing this, and then once the band took off, you were just like, oh, I also like doing this, I'm going to keep going in these directions?
Well, earlier in our conversation, I don't know if this was before we were on the air or not, you were talking about like, people like getting lucky. I think, John and I, we started in like 82 doing shows, and I was still in school then. I was still, and I had a full-time job. So, I was working for Metro North, working on the railroads as a surveyor, and counting people getting on and off trains. It was it was like out of a Russian novel, and the band. It's the evolution of a band is so strange because it can happen for something that inevitably. It's sort of like that. What's the Ernest Hemingway thing about going bankrupt? It happened very slowly, and then all of a sudden. I think being in a band, being in a successful band, there's the thing that's kooky about it is that from 82 to 87, it was like nothing was happening for us. I mean, we would go do shows and we clearly went over, if you're in a band and people like what you do, like if strangers like what you do and you've got something to offer, that definitely puts you in a different category. It's like there was definitely that going on with us even from the very first show. From the first show we did, most of the people in the audience we didn't know, and you could tell that it was something, and it wasn't clear what it was. I thought I was very confident that what we were doing was going to be perceived as something very abstract and slightly strange, and I immediately realized that we were being perceived as something very familiar and probably like somebody's brother and maybe their cousin, people related to our band, no matter how weird what we were doing was being presented, people related to what we were doing in a very friendly way. I guess, we just didn't invest enough in our own personal mystery to come across as different or strange. But I think ultimately that might be why we went over, but we always kind of went over, but it wasn't like, oh, these guys are going to be huge. I mean, I just was recently talking about seeing Elvis Costello. I saw Elvis Costello's first public show when I was 17.
Wow.
That was also I went to London in the summer of 1977 and saw a bunch of punk rock bands, but also saw Elvis Costello's first show. And I can tell you, it was at the Nashville Room. There were about 200 people in the room. I was still counting how many people were in the room. And that was definitely like A Star Is Born. Everybody's looking around at each other going can you believe how great this is? That was that. So I know what that is. And we never had, They Might Be Giants never had that. But we definitely had this is fun. This is worth checking out. These guys are interesting. And that worked for us. And we just puttered along, and things got bigger and bigger. And we just had good luck doing this and good luck doing that. There were people on the local New York scene who were incredibly friendly to us. Chris Butler from The Waitresses, the guy who wrote Christmas Wrapping. We didn't know him, and he lent us his DMX drum machine, this thing that cost $2,500 then. He just lent to essentially strangers. He's like, I like your band. You should use this. I'll take it. I'm going on the road. I'll be back in 3 weeks, or 2 weeks or whatever. Give it back to me, and don't break it. But we didn't know him. And Jules Shear, the guy who wrote All Through the Night, he was a songwriter, got us shows at Danceteria. He called up the guy who booked Danceteria and got us booked there. I've never called up a booking agent and said you got to book this band. It's the nicest thing. People were so nice to us. I mean, I do think we had some good luck and we made some good luck and we did a lot of shows. We played a lot. We played every week. For a couple of years, we played every weekend in Manhattan, which is an insane thing to even try to do. They're not there, but there were a lot of gigs kind of coming up. There were a lot of clubs, and it was just a very crazy time. But people were incredibly nice to us.
I have two questions from that. One of them was, were you surprised that you were, you said it was we were like someone's older brother or something like that. Were you surprised that you were connecting with people as someone who had niche interests?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I thought what we were doing was sort of inherently a little bit difficult and to get. And I liked a lot of bands. Like my favorite bands were kind of like growing up in the suburbs. There's always this thing of like, there's the suburban record store. What's the weirdest record in the store? And be like, oh, this is the Captain Beefheart record. That's the weirdest record in the store. Okay. Like, we're not as strange as Captain Beefheart, but when we started, we were closer to Pere Ubu or closer to the Residents than a lot of other things. And those were the bands that were very persuasive to us in that moment. I mean, we had gone through the Ramones and the Talking Heads and Elvis Costello and all that song stuff. But when we landed in New York, the no wave thing was really what was happening in New York, which was this very, kind of extreme, screamy. Ultimately, it was not very persuasive at all. Like, I mean, audiences didn't like it, but it was the thing that was officially happening, and so I mean, we weren't emulating that so much, but I think we were anticipating that it would be more of an uphill climb. Getting people to dig the band, but no, it always kind of had sort of an essential appeal, and it was ultimately maybe that's our lucky break. I mean, people say like, why did you succeed? And I think in spite of having a lot of kind of unorthodox elements in it, I think people just got it. They just got it in a very natural way. It didn't hurt their head trying to figure out why it clicked.
If it hadn't, do you think that graphic design would have satisfied whatever that feeling is inside of you to make things?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I ended up doing it professionally, and for like from like 20, what ages? Like from like the age of 21 to the age of 28, I worked in graphic design, like for publishing companies and magazines in New York City. And, it was a job. Like some of those jobs are horrible. I mean, I actually had jobs. I had more than one job where I worked in what had been a closet. More than one. I worked. What was it? I worked at Scholastic. I worked in a closet, and when I worked for part of my job at Random House, I worked in a closet, like a windowless, ventless room by myself with a door that had to be closed. Mm-hmm. And that was not a glamorous existence, but it was a job, and they were good paying jobs. Like that was the thing that was weird about it, was like, it was, coming from being an art student, it was like a shock to get paid so well. And by the end of it, I was working at Condé Nast, and that was it was just a great place to work. Like everybody, it was all these smart people and like this very sophisticated, very urbane reality. And my boss was like married to the guy who ran our the record company that put out our first record. So she was like she was being very kind to me to just let me work there. I mean, I was perfectly qualified to work there, but I wouldn't have gotten it. It was a friend relationship that got me in the door. But then, to be perfectly honest, it was like, it was such a good paying job. It was so crazy. Like I was making so much money, and to leave it to like the thing that finally broke it was like when the Lincoln album came out, and it was like touring took over my life and John's life, and we were just on the road all for like a year. And then both of us had this experience of kind of getting back to town and realizing that like there was another person working at the desk that we had left, and that there wasn't, we didn't get fired. We just sort of, and we didn't quit. The jobs just kind of floated away. So,
okay. Final question then. way that you have been describing this was that there was this kind of like, I don't know, I'll say the word vague desire to create. Maybe it was a little more overt than that. And that it kind of just like you settled, you were like making music, you are doing graphic design. At what point do you think it became your identity? Like, I'm a creative, like, at what point do you think you said to yourself, oh, I'm a creative person, or this is what I do, or this is like a deep part of me?
That's a really good question. I don't, I feel like there's like 3 levels to it. I think like when I was 6 years old and had a transistor radio and was listening to WABC, underneath my pillow, just listening to, the Supremes or whatever, that was as much what I was about as, I mean, if you're into something, you don't have to make it. It's true. To be somebody who, but I think anybody who writes a song, you realize you're always in communication with every other song that's ever been written. You're always, speaking of imposter syndrome, songs are all songs are songs, and all songwriters are just, like sometimes when you're writing a song, you're thinking like, this song is really like in dialogue with some Louis Armstrong song that you heard like 50 years ago and was made 100 years ago. And that's really what it is, and that's part of your creative process. You're not copying anything. You're just, thinking about it, riffing off it, maybe nicking some, hopefully it isn't a double-digit percentage of it, but it's like, songs are made of things, they're made of claves and chord progressions and melodies, and there's a lot of variation and there's a lot of ways to do it. When did I feel like I graduated to being, well, this speaks to just a final thing. I have a sort of professionally dysmorphic idea of the band. I think of what we're doing as just an abstract idea. I don't think of it as like, oh, it's John and these are our faces and this is our attitude and this is how we're presenting ourselves. Like, I actually think like in my dream, I would almost rather be like the Residents, and be like a faceless band that has no identity and because then there's the unlimited potential of being any kind of thing. You can write any kind of song and nobody's saying like, oh, that's so them. To me, if people just think that the songs are like a reflection of us, that seems somehow smaller and less interesting than writing a song that's just its own weird song. Songs, when I think of songs that I would really have loved to, I would have loved to have written like, Oh, Superman by Laurie Anderson. Like, to me, that's like, that would be like the achievement, because, Oh, Superman first of all, sonically, it's absolutely singular. It's just a crazy sounding song. And then at the lyric of it, at the core of it, it's almost just like she's a suburban girl, like talking about like her mom, it's like, no one couldn't relate to, it's about like leaving a phone message to your mom. It's so, I don't know. It's just like, to me, that is a kind of a perfect balancing act in a song. And, there's a million ways, pop songs are confections and they're all balancing acts and they're all, they've got this going and this going, this going. And to me, like, that's what's fascinating about it, is you can constantly reinvent it.
So it's almost, if I can say this, and tell me if I'm being accurate or not, it's almost as if just you contain all these multitudes within yourself, and that there wasn't like this is my identity. It's more like there's all of this that I'm containing within this one human being.
Yeah, I'm just, we're all just in the world, watching too much TV, listening to too much of the radio.
Yeah, but I think this is the difference, though. And I can only use myself as a sounding board, but like I feel like there is a thing that is me, and there are all these like boundaries around me, and I don't feel like there are certain things that I can do very, very well, and there are certain things that I am not great at creatively, and I just like I don't aim in those directions because I know it's going to be like at best mediocre.
Well, that is one of life's great disappointments. And as we enter into the third hour of this podcast, I want to explore, is that, it is frustrating when you figure out that you're not that good at the thing that a kind of thing that you might like even more than what you're good at. I think that's something that's not really discussed enough, I think for me and John, we both realized we were way better working with kind of set material, like that we could write tight stuff and rehearse it in kind of a tight way, and that crafty way of presenting ourselves. We were working with tape at the beginning, so it was like a drum machine on tape. So, and we would rehearse like demons to put stuff together. So a lot of it was really like a stunt, it's like, here's this crazy song, and it's like, we're going to present it in this like super rapid fire, crazy way, and it'll be kind of dazzling. And I think we figured out that that worked for us, because when we tried doing like expulsive, improvisational stuff, which was very popular in that moment, it didn't always scan so great. It didn't work. I just don't think we were that good at it. Like there were people around who were really good at it. Maybe the fact that like the band before us or the band after us was so much better at it, it kind of illustrated that. But yeah, it's a weird. It is hard, and I feel like a lot of creative people, they discount the thing that they're naturally good at. If something comes naturally to you, you kind of think, how could that be? How could that be so great? I mean, a friend of mine who's a much more successful musician than I am, his whole attitude is really wrapped up in that. Like he does not respect the thing that he's got like a very unique, point of view and a very unique set of skills, and he does not really respect it that much, and he's just like, yeah, whatever. And it's so interesting because in a weird way, it's like, from a distance, you're like, dude, like you're a freaking, genius. And it's like, I think that's a very natural, I think that's a very human thing for people to just not think that anything that they've got that comes easy is that special.
Yeah, but it feels like for you, again, that there's a lot of things that you are good at, and that all of those things together,
I am not
encompass
good at anything. It took me so long to just be able to sing and play the guitar at the same time. Like, it was just like, I mean, honestly, I'm not trying to beat myself up. I mean, I'm a self-actualized person. I got over that, but at the same time, like, I mean, I appreciate your enthusiasm for my potential. But
how did wait, if you have that kind of self-deprecating feeling inside of you, even in those early days, was it there? Like, how do you get over it to write music, to perform it?
I mean, there was a fair bit of woodshedding involved, but yeah, it didn't come that easy for me, I mean, also, like, I mean, it's hard to explain, but like, it came really slow. It came really hard. It was not natural, and I'm glad it got better. I mean, I can sing and play, and I can sing and tune pretty good now, and I mean, it's weird that some things like take a lifetime. Like, I feel like I can sing really well now. Like I can sing like a real singer now. But like I've spent a lot of time practicing. When we first started, like I couldn't keep my voice together for like a whole show. So, you know, people and our career could have ended like in that first 5 years, and that just would have been it. And I would be a guy who's like at the end of the bar going like, man, I wish I wish I had, practiced my vocal exercises more. But now, I have the satisfaction of like actually having, like I have I can look back on many shows where I sang really well. But yeah, I mean, these are weird. I mean, this is, as I say, I've never been to a therapist. So,
yeah. So it's almost as if like the proof is in the pudding in a certain sense where you're like, well, it seems like I've had this long career. I'm still making good music. It is people enjoy it. So that must, like you found the proof outside of yourself as opposed to from
internally. And like also, and this is no small thing, is that I'm in a duo, and people tend to like really want to kind of like Mutt and Jeff duos. Like when you're in a duo, you really come to understand that like the only thing they want is Oasis. They want you to be the opposites of each other. They want you to hate each other. Like, and the truth is, like I'm a year younger than John Linnell, and I was watching the Beatles anthology rerun thing a couple months back, and like George Harrison pointed out that he is like 9 months younger than Paul McCartney, and he feels like he will always be 9 months younger than Paul McCartney, and that it sort of defined their childhood relationship, but that also just carried through. And I think to a certain extent that is true for me and John. Like John was a really natural musician and had a lot of really great ideas, and he taught me an incredible amount of stuff. And he gave me a ton of confidence about a lot of things that I would not have been confident about. Like, just like his approval was incredibly huge for me. And really, it's everything. It changed me completely. And I feel like the great thing about being in a functioning duo is that you make each other brave. Like you look at you both have your kind of, bullshit meter set to stun a little bit. And then, something comes across the transom that seems really phony. And you go and you look at each other and you go like, I don't want to do that. It's like, I don't think we should do that. And that's a really different kind of situation than being by yourself when it's like, somebody comes to the room and says like, hey, there's a dumpster full of money if you just do this thing that's totally crappy. And you go like, okay, it's like, and what does that mean? Like, I mean, it means different things to different people. Like we've had a whole career doing children's music to a lot of people who are like very concerned about their public image and being taken seriously and concerned about their authenticity. They would say, oh, like, children's music is like, it is bullshit. Like, how can you even do that? But like, as a writer, I can tell you, writing for kids, if you want an open assignment, if you want to be in the world of, Charles Schultz and Bugs Bunny and Dr. Seuss, the greatest, most creative, energized, fun, cool stuff that's ever been, like write for kids. Because like writing for kids is at its elevated level is you're never going to get to something that is more an open invitation to do something inspiring than that. And I think, we sort of saw that was an opportunity. So that was that. But, it's not going to help you at the tattoo parlor,
John, that seems like a lovely place to end. Thank you so much for joining me. This has
been a marathon. I think I'm going to cry.
I've said, like, I have a real problem being genuine, but I mean, I have been listening to your music since I was a child,
Oh,
and
wow.
it
That's
is
great.
meant a lot. It has meant a lot to
Oh,
me.
well, it meant a lot to me. And it was a fascinating bunch of questions. Like, this is very different than a regular interview. So, thanks you for providing the
Yeah,
format.
and I appreciate you going on the journey with me. So thank you, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye, oh, 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 bye.